This week, I'm speaking with Kerry Hannon, and she has written a new book called Control at 50 Plus: How to Succeed in the New World of Work. Cue the music.
Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast, brought to you by Career Pivot. This podcast is where those of us in the second half of life come together to discuss how to repurpose our careers for the 21st century. Come listen to career experts give you proven strategies. Listen to people like you tell their stories on how they repurpose their careers. And finally, get your questions answered. Your host, Mark Miller, has made 6 career pivots over the last 30 years. He understands this is not about jumping out of the frying pan into a fire, but rather to create a plan where you make clear, actionable steps or pivots to a better future career. Are you ready to repurpose your career?
Welcome to episode 268 of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. My name is Mark Miller, and I'll be your host every Monday for discussion on what it's like to repurpose your career. This week, I'm speaking with Kerry Hannon, and she's written a new book called In Control at 50 Plus: How to Succeed in the New World of Work. Here is a snippet from the Amazon page. Anyone who began working 20 or 30 years ago has witnessed astonishing changes in the workplace during their career. When the global pandemic hit, older workers fortunate enough to retain their jobs once again had to navigate enormous upheaval virtually overnight. Working from home, often in isolation, over-50s found themselves facing daunting technological and social challenges. If this scenario is all too familiar, In Control at 50 Plus shows how to make the new normal work for you. Kerry Hannon, a workplace futurist and renowned expert on business, careers, and personal finance, combines all her insights and skills to help you actively shape your work future into what you want it to be. However, before we get to the episode, let's have a word from our sponsor, Career Pivot. The Career Pivot membership community continues to help the members who are participating in this project grow and thrive. This is a community where everyone is there to help everyone else out, figure out what they want to do in the second half of life, and then make it happen. Let's hear what Dean had to say about being part of the community.
First of all, you never know. There's always just a little push over the line to get you started, right? So when I first joined the community, the idea then was, I'm in this particular job, and I don't want to stay at this particular job for the rest of my life. And so whatever that push needs to be, it still needs to be there. And I need to try to figure out what that is. I can remember we were, over the weeks that we've been doing community meetings, people saying, hey, look, I could listen to your book, or I think you would do good at doing voice work. So that encouragement, I think that's been good from the community, is just to be able to talk to people, hear their opinions. I know that, for example, we were talking about the first book I did, and I remember, Mark, you were like, well, some of the reading was a little monotone, and it was, but it didn't hurt my feelings. I mean, I agree with you, right? I mean, it was my first book. It is what it is, and things like that are good to have, I think. And I think if somebody's looking to be a part of the community, that's one of the things they can look forward to with this.
I'm recruiting new members for the next group. If you are interested in learning more about the endeavor, please go to careerpivot.com/community. Now, on to my discussion with Kerry Hannon. Welcome to the Repurpose Your Career podcast. I have the real joy of having my friend Kerry Hannon on the podcast, and she has just published the book In Control at 50 Plus: How to Succeed in the World of Work. Welcome to the podcast, Kerry.
Well, it's a delight to be with you, Mark. Thank you for the invitation.
I read through the book quickly. What got you to write this book?
Well, I've spent a lot of time in the last decade plus looking at the job market for people over 50. So and they're my peeps, right? So this is something I care about. And as we got into the pandemic, it occurred to me that, in fact, there were profound changes in the way we work that were just everything was shifting around and changing how we do our work. And I thought, this is a time to be really observe what is happening out there. And so I was able to really analyze what I saw as sort of the 5 big trends coming out of the pandemic, and how someone over 50 can really take control by understanding what the trends are and moving forward to embrace this change and make it their time to really succeed at work, however they define work.
So what are the 5 trends?
Okay, well, the number one, and I will preface it by saying a lot of these trends started pre-pandemic. And what happened is the pandemic put the pedal to the metal. I mean, this accelerated what was happening. So number one is remote jobs, right? Remote work is here to stay. The genie's out of the bottle. It used to be you had to beg your boss to have that flexibility, that autonomy. It was a one-off, or, some people could do it, not everyone. Now they realize that it is truly something that workers are productive. They get their jobs done, and it's a cost saver for them. So it's opened the door big and wide. And for an older worker, it's fabulous, because I think it really fights ageism. When you're not standing right next to somebody who's 20 years younger than you, you're not, it's a subliminal thing, but you're not, the book isn't judged by its cover, so to speak, as much, right? And the second thing is, if you have mobility issues, here's an opportunity to work without having to commute, to have an office that's not properly retrofitted for you, ergonomically correct. So it's great in that way. The second trend is contract work is on the rise. It took off. Now, that's a good thing for workers in this category. Mostly, I caution people 50 to 65, be careful, because this means, yes, it's contract, it's cheaper for them because it's no benefits. And so if you need an employer-provided retirement plan, if you need health insurance provided by an employer, be careful, because this can be a really trappy situation to get into, and you have to take control of those parts of your financial life. But at the same time, there's a lot of opportunity if you want to work part-time, if you want to work on projects, contract, good stuff. Third one, entrepreneurship. And I know we're going to talk a little more about that. This has started pre-pandemic. I mean, this age group I wrote a book called Never Too Old to Get Rich, all about the midlife entrepreneur and how that person is often more successful than a younger one based on research and so forth. So I thought, okay, entrepreneurship took off even more, because if you were laid off or took early retirement, my goodness, the whole thought of getting back on the job hunt again was, demoralizing. Who wants to be rejected again and again? Time to do your own thing. So if you had the financial resources and the great idea, a lot of people, and again, Mark, we'll talk more about this, but these are micro businesses. I'm not talking about the next Uber necessarily. The other big trend I meant coming out of the pandemic was career transition. There are more people who are transitioning to different kinds of work. They're redeploying their skill sets. So that's a major trend. It used to be only the outliers did that career transition, like, oh, aren't you brave? What a risk taker. You just, you're a second actor. But today, this is getting to be quite common for people over 50 and even younger coming out of the pandemic. Hey, I'd rather work. I want to do something different over here. And the final one is really lifelong learning. I mean, that it just sort of really exploded in this idea that we can learn. It doesn't cost a lot. It's absolutely essential to staying in the workplace. Even to be a successful volunteer, you need to keep your job skills sharp. And so the ability to learn online virtually has just been amazing.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm getting ready to speak at a finance conference. In fact, when this publishes, I'm probably already up in Austin speaking. And it's interesting. The only industry that's telling everybody they got to come back in the office is finance. And the reason why is regulatory. Well,
yeah, because all the privacy, all the walls and
yes.
security. Yeah. And they're not being paranoid. Their cyber stuff is huge, right? And it's proprietary information. So it's definitely, I can understand that.
Yep. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, you have Kerry's fitness plan, which you've had for quite a while.
Yes.
And I still think it's worthwhile discussing, particularly as it relates to 50 plus careers.
Well, I appreciate you bringing it up, because I love talking about Kerry's fitness plan. And there are 3 parts of it. It's not terribly complicated, but it doesn't mean it's something you can do overnight, but you do need to do it every day. The first one is financial fitness. So you got to get lean and mean. You've got to take control of your finances, do a budget, figure out where you're spending your money and how can you trim back your expenses? How can you pay down debt? Maybe refinance your mortgage, sell your house, move someplace more cost effective, as you have done, a lower income, a lower cost area to live in. Anything you can do to take control of that, because that gives you the ability to take on work that maybe didn't pay as much as your primary career did, or take on projects that you really want to do, but you're not tied to a particular salary. Or if you want to start your own business, you have the ability to not pay yourself initially as it gets up to speed. So that's really important to be financially fit, because debt, and I've said this a million times, but it's the biggest dream killer, and money is clearly the biggest stumbling block to starting your own business. Second piece, physical fitness, because you know what? It goes a long way to fighting ageism. A lot of people say, hey, should I get Botox? Should I dye my hair? I'm like, hey, what the heck if you want to? But probably the best thing to do is get physically fit, and doesn't have to be running fast miles or bench pressing, but 20 minutes a day, eat with an eye to nutrition, swim, walk. I walk my dog, whatever you like to do it, because when you're physically fit, you have this can-do spirit, this energy, this positivity that you might not even realize it yourself. And certainly the people who are around you might not identify what it is, but they want you on their team. They want to work with you. They want to hire you. Physical fitness is just super. Actually, all these things are good for anything we do in life. But the final piece is spiritual fitness. And that's not necessarily religious or any of those things. Nothing wrong with all that. But this is maybe it's stuff you do as well. Mindful meditation, it's Tai Chi, yoga. When you are spiritually fit, when you have this sort of fitness there, it quiets things down. So I really encourage people to kind of build those three things into their life in order to take on new challenges.
Well, I can relate to all of that because I look at when we moved to Mexico, we literally got rid of most of everything. I live at a fraction of what I used to live on, which has shifted my mindset around money big time, because I don't worry about it anymore.
Yeah.
The second is I am in probably the best health I've been in 40 years.
I love it.
Right? I eat healthier. I'm down to the same weight I was when I graduated from college. Well, yesterday we climbed, me and a buddy of mine climbed 2,500 feet up a bike ride up 2,500 foot climb. Huh. And I can, in fact, at 65, I can do that. And I'm not dead at the end.
Yay.
Right? And just getting the right mindset, and it's a level of reducing your worry. And the last is about the career shift. There's no question. We're seeing more people question, why am I doing what I'm doing? And when you've got all that fitness, you can do that. It's much easier when you are clear in your head and around the money and the fitness and your health and just having the right mindset. It's so much easier to say, why did I do that?
Yeah. And Mark, and that's another thing during this time where we all had to grapple with COVID and the lockdowns and shutdowns and the world getting smaller for a while. We did have that time to seek out and do that soul searching, that inner MRI about what matters to me? What are my priorities at this stage in life? Where do I want to be spending my time? And I think that's a perfect example of it. It's liberating.
Well, plus, you talk in the book about your mother and being the caretaking for your mother before she passed. I've had, I don't know, half a dozen people in my online community who have all gone through that in the last 2 years. And it's been really tough during COVID. And that alone forces people to reevaluate.
I think so. And I think the caregiving bit was enormous. And I think that you may shift into talking that a little bit later about the toll that can take on us and the need for flexibility.
In the last year plus, there have been more tax IDs issued than almost the history of the IRS.
Yeah.
And a significant number of those tax IDs have been issued to those of us who are a little bit older.
Yep.
you have a whole chapter on starting a business.
Yeah, I mean, because this is just a tremendous time, I think, for so many reasons, and it had been, as we talked about, something that had been percolating up. But the ability to start a business without bricks and mortar, it's not a huge expense. It can be a couple $1,000s maximum, really, just to get up and rolling and get started. There's so many ways that we can, at this stage in our life, use our experience, use our if we have capital together to help launch. But as I said, it doesn't have to be expensive. But we have a network of people. We know how to do so many things. It's kind of our time to launch. And so I see a great swell of this happening. But the other thing that's cool is what you do, Mark, and you do a lot of this, is you can also have these virtual networking groups, these support groups. You're not out there all alone starting a business and you're sitting in your home office with your computer. You can, engage a couple of people to keep you accountable, to ask questions, to use as sounding boards. I love what you do with that.
Well, in fact, I just had a phone call yesterday with a gentleman who was thinking of starting his own business, but he was limiting it strictly to where he lived in Illinois. And I said, the world's your playground. You can do this for anybody, or more importantly, the business you start. Now, maybe you go down to your small business development center there locally, but everything else can be done. It's your playground. The world is your playground.
Yep.
And that's a real mindset shift. Quick interruption. If you are enjoying this podcast, please rate it and review it on whatever podcast player you are using. And more importantly, would you mind telling a friend? Thanks, and back to the podcast episode.
Yeah, it just opens the door to, and this whole world now too, that you don't have to hire employees full time. You can say, hey, I'm not great at bookkeeping. I can hire a virtual bookkeeper who can come in once a month and help me out here. I can hire a virtual assistant who can help me returning some of these emails or organizing my day. There's ways that one of the biggest things that entrepreneurs have a problem doing is delegating. They tend to try to do everything themselves, but because of the virtual way of work these days, the way this has exploded, you can find really great people who want to dive in and help you on that kind of limited basis, but be part of your team as well.
One of the most important things is to look at what you don't like to do and what are the things you're not very good at, and delegate those things.
Yeah.
Because I've worked like on this podcast. I like editing the podcast. There are a lot of things like the artwork, which I am completely artistically challenged. I have my virtual assistant. She edits my verbal vomit, or I should say my written vomit. And she, I even have her listen to the podcast to make sure that everything actually came out the way it was supposed to, because it doesn't always.
Yeah.
And I pay her to do that. Absolutely. And that's one of the things that learning to do is to let go. And I think you talk about a little bit in the book about the fact that you may not think you can afford it, but you can't afford not to do it.
Yeah. And you can start in baby steps. You don't have to launch today. You can just get started and do, it's basic advice, but really do one thing a day to push it forward, to find somebody who's doing something similar to what you want to do and ask them about it. People love to talk about their work. So as long as you're not going to be right in their face competing with them, they're more than happy to help you out. And so, find those people who can be your knowledge base and really guide you, or depending on the work, if you can freelance or volunteer or, moonlight with somebody to get a sense of how does this really work? And, add those skills. If you need to add some new skills, do it. I mean, there's ways to get those certifications if you need them. That's not hugely expensive. So knock those off one at a time. And it's great to I love these crowdfunding in a way, because if you want to raise a little money on crowdfunding, you build in this nice network of loyal supporters, of people who you can test market some ideas out on. And that makes it kind of fun in a way, because you can, it can be a little bit trial and error as you go along. But but it is really something that's a process. And I find, and you probably have too, it usually takes a couple of years to really get started, but maybe it's 3 years. Give it time to get some traction before you really know that you're established. But don't be afraid to ask for help. I think that's, and Mark, the other thing, and I know you'll concur because you spend so much time in this entrepreneur space, is that when I ask people, when I did my book, Never Told to Get Rich, I'm like, what would have you done differently? These entrepreneurs over 45 was that group. And the number one thing is they said, well, yeah, they wish they had more money when they started. Okay, we get that. Number two, they wish they had more sales experience. They often felt that they didn't have that. And, because even if you bring on a virtual salesperson or marketing person, you still have to you're the front and center of your business. So you need to have that elevator pitch down. You need to be comfortable talking about what you do and why you do it and why now, why this. So I think that's something that people need to be aware of, whether even if it's taking improv class or something where you're comfortable talking and being out in front and so forth. So, or Toastmasters. I like some of those basic public speaking ideas, but you probably have others too, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, actually, when someone says I'm going to start a business, the first thing I do is hand them Patrick Lencioni's book, Getting Naked, which is about consultative selling.
Yeah.
And good introverts can actually be really good salespeople because they're really good at listening. And many people who are outside of the sales world look at sales as trying to convince you to spend your money versus a good salesman is there to solve a problem.
Oh, I love that.
Right.
Yeah.
And so therefore, first you got to figure out what their problem is and then come up with an appropriate solution. And the book Getting Naked is about it's a business fable. It's a very easy read. So if you're interested in consulting selling, I won't go any further. Go buy the book Getting Naked.
Yeah. But, and the other thing they said is they wish they had delegated sooner. And we already talked about that a bit, but that's a real, and that old famous thing everybody says, if you're working in the business, you're not working on the business. And so that's classic, right?
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to cover with you is you have a chapter on career advice for women over 50, which I think is the biggest challenge we have in our economy because women have been, well, they called it a she session at the beginning of the recession because women have been displaced so badly. And we know I had Barbara Marcus on the podcast in December with her latest book. And the fact is, women are forced out of their jobs at a later age, far more than men are.
Oh, without question. And also women, Barbara's book is great. I recommend that to anyone. She has some great points there. And the other thing that happened during the pandemic is women stepped away from the workplace, not even being pushed out necessarily, but they chose to, for reasons similar to as you alluded to with my mom. I was working for myself, so I managed to make it work. But if I had been a full-time employee where I had to be in a situation 9 to 5, I could not have done it. So it's caring, not necessarily child care, but adult caregiving for our, aging relatives. And I was hanging by a thread, and I don't know how anyone could perform their job. Luckily I was a freelancer, so I could shift things around, get up at 4, get up at 5, whatever it was, get it done. And that's why a lot of these women stepped away from the workplace. And then at this age, oh my goodness, trying to get back in, you've got, and Barbara talks about these things in her book as well. Not only do you have ageism and you have some gender issues, obviously we talk about pay like crazy anyway, it still exists, but lookism, women are still very much judged on their looks more than men are. And so age doesn't do us a lot of service in some situations. I don't think I have an issue with this, but I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? It's just that to the outside world, it can be a real challenge. And, the thing is, it can be difficult to get back in if you had any kind of a gap. So the important thing is you have to, that whole thing about Ginger Rogers dancing backwards in high heels. This is the same thing women have to do in the workplace. So you have to prove yourself once again if you stepped out. But what we're looking for, Mark, is Flexibility, because that's what employers, in order for women to really get back into the workplace, they need to have that empathy from an employer. They have to have that understanding of caregiving, because to me, caregiving, whether for young or old, that is the big issue for women who stepped out of that workplace in this she-session. And if that nut can be solved as a way to get employers. So I see a lot of women who have started to come back in. They're working through groups like Flex Professionals and staffing agencies like that help them find contract positions that are part-time or flexible in nature. And that's a real selling point.
Yeah, one of the key themes in my online community that I run is everybody wants flexibility. Everyone wants control.
Yeah, so in control, exactly.
But
didn't we always want that? And I think younger people want that too. I mean, it's just people realize especially the digital nomads, those kids who grew up just with, they realize they don't need to go into an office. They don't need to work certain hours necessarily, that they can get their work done. They're, by working on their own terms. Now, not every company is set up that way, obviously, but if an employer can empower their employees that way, the payback can be tremendous.
Yeah, I think it's number one is asking for what you want. And you first have to know what you want. And the one thing I'm seeing is, as I said, we talked about previously, this pandemic has forced us to rethink what's important to us. And would I take less money if I didn't have to, if I didn't have to commute? One of the first questions I'm going to ask when I go in front of this finance group is going, who's really loving their commute again?
No one. I mean, nobody. And I mean, yeah, I think it's fun to, I went to a conference this week, I guess, in New Orleans. And it was the first time that I was with a gathering like that. And it was really fun to connect with people again. It was energizing, Mark. But do I need to go to an office every day to get that hit? No. And I can get my work done just fine. And in fact, I'm kind of tired of all the Zoom stuff anyway. I'm good on the old telephone. That works. But maybe I do date myself there. But I think, the thing is, we are good communicators. And so if you are willing to keep that door open and communicate with whoever you're working with, it's great. But I want to say one more thing about women in the workplace and connect that to entrepreneurship, because women are starting businesses at a super quick clip. And African-American women in particularly, Black women and Hispanic women, because they find the job market has shut them out. And this is an avenue. This is an opportunity. Women are fabulous entrepreneurs for a couple of good reasons. It's why we're wonderful investors. We take our time. We're patient. We ask for help. We don't expect to hit that home run right away. We do, on and on. We're more collaborative than men. I'm saying, a little bit stark contrast, but in many ways, women are more empathetic, more collaborative, and more willing to delegate in a way that they don't let their egos run the show. So, and they're more willing to partner up with somebody. Instead of men tend to want to go it on their own, women tend to partner up. Whether it's with a man or with another woman. I see a lot of that.
You use that phrase, asking for help.
What is that?
What is that? I'm a guy. I don't ask for directions.
Wait a minute. What do I need help with? I can do it all. But, it's true saying when we don't know how to do something, like I was saying to you briefly before we got started, I wasn't sure how to use Google Docs, but I called up one of my pals who works in Google Docs. And I said, hey, I remember you told me you used to do this. And he's like, yeah, let me give you a minute or 2 or 3, or in this case, 20, and walk me through it. And he did. And I was empowered, and I didn't feel stupid asking him. And now I know how to do it.
Very cool. So, Kerry, when someone finishes the book, what do you want them to do?
I want them to really value themselves. I want them to learn through the process of reading the book, going through some of the exercises, And whether it's working with a career coach, whether it's doing this inner journaling by themselves, this self-exploration about what kinds of things interest them at this stage in life, and what's their mission and what kind of work they do, whether it's for pay or volunteer, but really understand their value that they bring to the world and why that's important and why that will make this next chapter of their lives better. And not only the impact they make on others, but in their own day-to-day, that, bring that joy back, bring that happiness back into why you get up in the morning. And, you should never, life is we don't know what we have time here on earth. And for goodness sakes, enjoy your day, and make a difference.
Now, I want to finish this. You just took a job. And my question to you is, how did that happen?
Yeah, well, brilliant. Yes, I'm a senior columnist at Yahoo Finance, and it is the world's largest personal finance platform, 700 million users. I mean, it is amazing. I had no idea, right? And I had some friends who worked there at different times and are there now, but I wasn't looking for a job. I've been running my own business for 20 years. I worked in-house for 20 years for Forbes, US News, USA Today. I went on my own for 20 years. And then out of the blue, a recruiter found me on LinkedIn. They found my profile. They had a job opening. They're like, hey, would you be interested in talking to people about this job? And I said, well, sure. I said, but that's not really what I do exactly. Ends up they designed this job for what I do and what I like to write about: retirement, careers, personal finance, entrepreneurship. And I mean, what fun is that? And I'm not locked into the over 50 set, although I love my people and I'm certainly in that set. But now it opens up the doors that I can write about all different age cohorts. And I feel a real sense of liberation. But the point was, it was what I tell everyone: get a great, for a white collar job, have a great LinkedIn profile. You just never know. And I was open to the invitation. I didn't shut the door. I was like, okay, let's explore this. And it went like lightning speed. And, I'm over the moon about it. It's really been fun. And I can still carve out, I negotiated for some of my autonomy so that I'm a remote worker. I don't go into an office. I can still have some of my side business that I do, my speaking and things like that. I can write books. So they were really generous with me and they valued me.
The reason I asked you that was in the previous week, I had Dev Livingston, who is a domain person for Get Set Up on the podcast. And in both of your cases, it was a bit of serendipity.
Yeah.
It just happened.
Yeah, I was not looking for it.
You did not plan it, but more importantly, you were open to it.
Yeah, that's the truth. And I was curious, and that's the word we always use with I tell people when they're looking for work or what they're doing at this stage in life, say you're curious, or actually be curious. And I was curious about what were they talking about and how would I fit into that organization and why me and how do they do things. And so I'm like off on this new exploration. And so, hey, it really has been fun, but it's true. And one thing I will say is I was with, and I think this is public knowledge. And since you mentioned Deb, Get Set Up I was with them at this conference I was at this week, and they're having a new initiative for entrepreneurs, in particular, an accelerator that will help people over 50 who want to launch businesses kind of go through the different things you need to know about, from marketing to bookkeeping and all kinds of stuff. And even perhaps offer a little seed money to help you get started, depending on how it all goes. So I encourage people to look into what they're up to. I think they've got a real head of steam up.
Yeah, I'll put a link to that. Actually, I have a member in my online community who is in that accelerator program.
Oh, great. Yeah.
And yeah, it's the key piece is I've had several members who have, it's been serendipity that they end up with something that and I use the example with Deb. Deb's doing a job that didn't exist 5 years ago. And she had no credentials.
Yep.
But she had a passion. And so you get more people, particularly women, who say, well, I just don't have the credentials, so I won't go for it. And the answer is no, not at all.
Yeah. Women, that you're right about. That's a good different. The women thing is important because women tend to think they have to check every box. And a man is more often to say, if I get two of them, good, give it a whirl. So I think that's a personality or a cultural difference. And it's something that women need to work on. Give it a shot.
So, Kerry, this has been great.
Yeah.
If someone wanted to reach out and contact you, and more importantly, buy your book, the more important piece, how might they do that?
Oh, you're so kind. Okay. So my email is, and I love emails. I love to hear from people. So Kerry, Kerry at KerryHannon.com, Kerry at KerryHannon.com, website, KerryHannon.com. Pretty easy stuff. And the book is, you can find a link to get to the book from my website, but support your indie bookstores for sure. So Indie Bound is a good place to buy it, but also Amazon. It's up there on Amazon for or by the time you all are listening to me, it's right there. So any of the normal booksellers have it, and I'm just thrilled to have this out there, and I hope it's a good sort of guide for people who want to just really make the most of this next chapter.
Well, Kerry, thank you very much for being on the Repurpose Your Career podcast.
Thank you, Mark. You're terrific.
Kerry does a nice job in this book at bringing the entire picture together on the future of work for those of us who are over 50 years of age. I would encourage you to read the book. Take a moment, go to careerpivot.com and sign up for the Career Pivot Insights newsletter, which is sent out every Sunday. You'll get a weekly update on this podcast and new blog posts. While there, do not forget to check out the Career Pivot community, which can be found at careerpivot.com/community. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Look for Career Pivot on Facebook and LinkedIn. You'll also find me on Twitter at Career Pivot. Thank you for listening all the way to the end of the Repurpose Your Career podcast. You will find all the show notes at careerpivot.com/episode-268. You can also subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Podcasts, Podbeam, Overcast, Spotify, Pandora, Amazon Music, and lots of other places where podcasts can be found. In fact, this podcast can be found on the Repurpose Your Career podcast channel on YouTube. Hope to see you next Monday for another episode of Repurpose Your Career podcast.